Hi, this is Ben Llewellyn. Today I'm asking a question about identity between English and British. There's a significant difference there. What is it? Hey, hit that subscribe button, it really helps the channel. Going around the world, we don't generally say that we speak British. We'd say that we speak English. There's Australian English, there's British English, American English, and so on. The schools of English. If you go to Malaysia, they don't say the School of British, they say the School of English. Why not? Because this is where it's from, the island of Britain, but we still don't call it British, do we? There's a significant difference there. And it's important to understand the difference to understand, well, Britain. So if we don't speak British, who does speak British? What is the British language? That's quite complicated, but basically the Welsh do. And the Britons who don't live in Britain. And the Cornish who live in another part of Britain. Let me show you on a map. Here are those three on the map here. You can see they've been pushed back to peninsulas by other groups, mainly the English language, but down there the French. That's another story. So who are these Britons and how do and did the English view them? Well, when the Romans came to Britain, there was a Brythonic or British language, Celtic, closely related to Irish, more so related to it then than Welsh is now, I would say, because there was not the Latin element yet. With the Roman Empire, Latin was heavily injected into the Welsh language. It makes up a lot of the bones, nuts and bolts of our language. So braich is the word for arm, and you'll notice when you speak Latin-based languages, like Romanian, brats is the word for arm. Very similar. So if you have Welsh, you've got a bit of that. And it did, if you want to be a purist about it, it lost a lot of what would have been named British by the Romans. But they didn't really see it so unified that way. And Britain certainly was not unified in the period. After the Romans left, however, a language by that time had evolved that was Romano-British. The Romano-Britons. You had the story of King Arthur. He wasn't English.
It's a miracle, ordained by heaven. This boy is our king.
Well, by Jove.
What's the lad's name?
What? I mean Arthur.
Hail, King Arthur!
Hail, King Arthur!
In fact, it's really kind of odd that he even speaks English in films about him because the English were the people that he was fighting. And this is what I'm getting to in this video. Much of what British is or was has been appropriated by another culture. Doesn't mean that English is worse or better or the villain. No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that the English culture has appropriated a lot of what British is. So that when people ask the question, well, why don't the English speak British? There's an actual clear answer there, is that the Welsh do speak British and there is a British language. It would be really great if someone made a King Arthur film in Welsh and made it a blockbuster. That would be much more, well, historically accurate. And just after this period of the King Arthur, or the figures that were amalgamated into being King Arthur, several different warlords, you had writers, usually writing in Latin in England, and they were describing the British in a very pejorative, angry, bitter way, because they saw them as the foreigners. The English word for the Britons, the Welsh, meant foreigner. In the Saxon language, I don't like to call it English. English wasn't really born yet at that time, and Gildas had quite negative things to say in his On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain. He was trying to explain why the Saxons were able to conquer these people and why they deserved to conquer them. He said that the Britons were a filthy people. They had a plague of God put upon them. They were bickering, childish, unable to govern themselves. And this propaganda, this pejorative attitude was embedded in the psyche of the emerging English people from their very embryonic birth. They did not want anything to do with the Britons or being British. They hated them with a passion. They hated the Britons. They were English. Referring to their language, they would say things like the groans of the barbarians. You had several English saints which claimed when they heard demons and devils, they spoke the British language. They spoke Welsh because they were demons. This is how much they detested these people and how much they were asserting they were not British. This continued well into the medieval period, and the Welsh, who were writing in their language, wrote poems like Artemis Prydain, which called for the reconquest of Britain because they were the Britons. You had elegies and eulogies celebrating princes which were the rightful heirs of Britain, the ancient Old North. And on the other side, the English were celebrating often that they had Germanic roots, or later on their Anglo-French roots, claiming the Kingdom of France. So this is a direct contrast. It couldn't be more different between the English and Welsh, how they thought of themselves in the early period in relation to what Britishness is. As the Welsh became conquered, King Edward I, who conquered them, said, "Finally at last, the last ruler of that filthy British race has been conquered." So certainly in the 13th century, that's what they thought about the British. And they were, well, by this time, Norman French English. There was much confusion in the century afterward whether to speak even English at all or French. And that's how the English language was so filled in with French in this period. They wanted to identify with France. They wanted to rule over France. They were aware that the Normans had come from France and had a claim over it. They weren't concerned with British. However, as they fought the French, they began to feel more English and identify with that. Not quite the Saxon language, but the emerging and now flourishing at that point English language. And the literature at the time, from Chaucer on certainly, you see the word English over and over again to describe themselves, not British. It's flaked in there, it's suggested. There's this subtle subconscious awareness that the Welsh, those pesky people in the hills, those are the British. We came from somewhere else. In 1535 and 1542, laws were passed by the English crown, annexing Wales completely into England and abolishing all Welsh law. But the wording in this spoke about the English tongue and absorbing Wales into the English crown. There was no mention of British, because at this point, Scotland was an independent kingdom. There was no unified Britain. In Wales's case, the concept of who they were, the idea of being British, they held on to that, and that never quite completely went away. However, this begins to change when the New World is discovered, and they have Welsh legends of Prince Madoc, who supposedly sailed to America claiming it. And the English crown latched onto this, saying, oh, well, we have claim to this British kingdom, in a way, using it as propaganda. Not long afterward, from the Welsh perspective, you have Thomas Jones, an antiquarian of sorts and a scholar, writing in Welsh and English. And he wrote one of the first true comprehensive dictionaries, Welsh-English dictionary. It's interesting that his title is different between Welsh and English. In Welsh, it's a Gymraeg yn ei disglerdeb, the Welsh language in its brilliance. But in English, it's the British language in its luster. He's describing Welsh to the English as British to try and entice them in, to get them to be proud of the greatness of Britain from the point of view that the Welsh are the Britons. And this period of the men of letters and antiquarians in the 17th century, especially going into the 18th century, and then you have a figure called Iolo Morgannwg, who invented the Eisteddfod, was harking back to the Druids, or supposedly the Druids. A lot of stuff was made up. Iolo Morgannwg was quite a character, and he set up something called Gorsedd Berfyn Ysbrydain. Gorsedd means a council of Welsh or British bards, and that's the point. He set it up in London to remind the Welsh that they are British in a time when Welsh identity around the year 1800 was moving more, well, at least in the patriotic circles, toward being Welsh. And he wanted to remind them that they were British in a patriotic sense, as being the rightful claimants of this in a way, especially in the poetic sense of a poetic tradition. One significant effect on how the English saw themselves was the Acts of Union of 1707. England and Scotland were merged into a single political state, but you didn't have them defining themselves as British. The Welsh still were, however. And there's the word British popping up more and more in the sense of this union of two kingdoms. But ar lawr y gwlad, that means in Welsh, at common speech of people in the country, that the word British didn't really seep in. And going forward through into Iolo Morgannwg's time at the beginning of the 19th century, and as the liberals begin to emerge after that, you have politicians using the word English. They're not using the word British to describe themselves. And they're not using the word British to describe any culture. They refer to it as English and Scottish at this point. Wales isn't really existing in any legal sense, but those Welsh writers who are writing are using the word British in many circumstances. And you have liberal politicians like Peel and John Bright and Gladstone who are using the word English in their great speeches. Let me give you this one from John Bright to show you how they thought of themselves in terms of not being British, but they were thinking of themselves as being English. Great liberal speeches. Good book if you want to peruse people's speeches from yesteryear. But check this out. About 170 years ago, there happened in this country what we would have been accustomed to call a glorious revolution. That happened in the year 1688, by the way. A revolution which had this effect, that it put a bit into the mouth of the monarch, so that he was not able, of his own free will, to do, and he dared no longer attempt to do, the things which his predecessors had done without fear. But if at the Revolution the monarchy of England was bridled and bitted, at the same time the great territorial families of England were enthroned, and from that period those territorial families reigned with an almost undisputed sway over the destinies and the industry of the people of these kingdoms. So you see three things in those words. One, John Bright sees his country as England. Second, these territorial families, of which any culture is built on, especially in that period, are of an English ancestry. There's no concept of British there at all. And then thirdly, these kingdoms. Britain is not seen as a singular entity. There is no British. So there can be no British language. The British language would belong to the people that have been swept into the western fringes, the natives. And that's where a man named David Lloyd George pops up towards the end of the same century. Another liberal politician, but a Welshman, who begins to use the word British in a new way, which makes the English feel a bit uneasy at times, but he's clever, so much so that he convinces them of their own greatness in order to express Welshness in a cultural identity on a public stage at the top of the hierarchy for the first time. He reinvents the Prince of Wales through Britishness. He reinvents Welshness through Britishness, revamping it, refurbishing it, making it a nation again. Not that it was never a nation, but that it was, in the eyes of the English, not a nation. He reimagines the British nation through how the English view Britishness. And he wasn't quite able to use the word British to encapsulate this new identity. So the word Welsh had to be used, because by this time many of the Welsh saw themselves as Welsh rather than their individual non-English identity being British. So the word Welsh really picks up speed from this point of the end of this liberal era in the 1910s, 1920s. Look at this graph here. This shows the usage of British people and English people throughout the early periods and into the mindset of the British Empire, which we call it today. English people was used far more than British people. But then, when that guy Lord George came in, that Welshman, that spiked up. That coincided with the Irish War of Independence and a Welshman being Prime Minister. So the English, they felt threatened by these identities in a way, and by Lord George promulgating British, they felt safer in their identity. And from this point, the British people idea really takes off as a form of propaganda to unify people. You'll see that in World War II here, British people spikes to astronomical heights. You had to be unified against the Nazis. As time went by during the 20th century, British replaced English. And this, in the 1920s, caused the birth or rebirth of both Scottish and Welsh nationalism, because they saw and understood themselves as not being the same people. So the English adopting British caused Welsh and Scottish nationalism to grow throughout the 20th century, until you get a backlash towards the end of the 20th century against Welsh and Scottish devolution. But they never managed to cross that bridge in terms of calling the English language British, because, well, it's not the British language. Welsh is. I hope you enjoyed this video. And hey, leave me a like or a comment. Diolch yn fawr am wylio. Thank you much for watching, and we'll see you next time.